Summary of On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder. In his book On Tyranny, a brief guide to 20 various techniques that individuals might take to protect democracy against an authoritarian regime, historian Timothy Snyder looks to Europe in the 20th century in an effort to assist Americans living in the 21st century with coping with the presidency of Donald Trump. In fact, the idea for this best-selling book came from a Facebook post that many Americans made after Trump was elected, when they began to worry that Trump's political views and way of speaking were a lot like those of Nazis and rulers today. Snyder writes in his prologue that he shares this fear and says that democratic governments have always given way to tyranny, ever since the ideas of democracy and tyranny were first thought of in ancient Greece. Americans also think that democracy is safe by nature and that their government is strong enough to protect itself from threats that are against democracy. This is not the case. People all through history have made the same mistake. They thought their democracies would last, but authoritarian governments destroyed them in just a few years, setting their countries on a path to ruin and, in the worst cases, horrible violence campaigns like the Holocaust. Snyder says that the same fear of failure is now facing American democracy, and he gives people 20 ways to help keep it together. Snyder's first rule is don't follow ahead of time. A large part of the public has generally backed rulers like Adolf Hitler throughout history. Most people have also put aside their personal differences and reluctantly followed the rules set by the government. People should not do this because tyranny works by getting people to obey and then putting in place oppressive and anti-democratic rules that hurt those people who are quietly following. Snyder also begs readers to defend institutions. Institutions are only as strong as the people who work in them. To get rid of checks and balances on their power, authoritarians always try to break down democratic institutions. Snyder's third rule is also about this: beware the one-party state. A multi-party system that works well makes sure that no one group can fully use the government to further their own personal goals. Snyder says that the United States is almost a one-party oligarchy, even though it has a well-known two-party system. This is because the Republican Party uses unfair methods to get and keep power, like voter suppression and gerrymandering, even though very few Americans support them and very few wealthy people benefit from their policies. Snyder also tells people to take responsibility for the face of the world. That is, he says they should not put up the signs of hate, exclusion, and loyalty that rulers and their followers tell them to. These signs of loyalty, like swastikas and gold stars in Nazi Germany or pro-government signs in communist Eastern Europe, let leaders get involved in people's personal lives to further their own goals. Next, Snyder begs his readers to remember professional ethics when the government says they don't matter anymore. His point is that when the Nazi government told people to obey, doctors, lawyers, and business people all didn't follow their normal moral rules. Because of this, they took part in the Holocaust directly. People must not give up their professional ethics when the government tells them to. These moral pledges are firm and cannot be broken, and they must come first. Snyder's sixth and seventh rules are about why and how to use armed force. Be wary of paramilitaries, he writes in the sixth. Tyrants use these groups, such as secret police and death squads, for their own personal gain. Snyder also asks readers in the 7th chapter to be reflective if you must be armed. This is because Snyder knows that the Nazis and Soviets used regular police officers and soldiers in their mass murder campaigns, even though they knew they were being asked to attack the people it was their job to protect. Snyder tells readers in the 8th chapter to stand out. In the same way that Winston Churchill's defense of Britain against Hitler gave the Allies the upper hand in World War II, and Teresa Prekarowa's refusal to leave her Jewish friends in the Warsaw Ghetto when the Nazis told them to, people today can stand in contrast to the status quo and help others remember the morals and duties that tyrants want them to give up. Snyder begins to look at the verbal and psychological tools that authoritarian governments, especially extreme totalitarian ones, use to silence criticism and keep the people in line in the next 3 chapters. People who read chapter 9 are told to be kind to our language. Tyrants change the meaning of words like the people on purpose to make people think that everyone supports and agrees with their policies. People should remember that these words have real meanings and not fall into the collective trance of everyone else. Americans today should read books instead of just watching the nightly news to improve their ability to think critically and build a mental armory of ideas about history and politics. Snyder says in Chapter 10 that it is important to believe in truth. He says that Donald Trump can't tell the difference between dream and reality, makes promises that are obviously not true, like lowering taxes, raising spending, and lowering debt all at the same time, and bases his politics on feeling and loyalty instead of facts and policy. He can get people to support him without having to help them in any way with this plan. Snyder asks people to investigate in Chapter 11 to back up the truth. In particular, they should check the facts of what they read online and try to support good independent news instead of just reading opinion pieces written by people who agree with them. Snyder teaches people how to keep their freedom in their daily lives in the next 4 parts. To start, they should just make eye contact and small talk with their friends to let them know that they won't let politics get in the way of their personal lives. After that, they should practice corporeal politics and protest in the streets as a group instead of staying home and hope the government will change. Third, people should establish a private life, mainly by protecting their online privacy. This way, they can set a line that the government can't cross and make sure that future dictators can't use their information against them. Fourth and lastly, people should contribute to good causes by giving their time and money to groups that matter to them. People can use their right to free association to fight against unfair laws and keep civil society going. Civil society is the part of group life that is not controlled by the government. Snyder tells his readers in the 16th chapter to learn from peers in other countries. A lot of Americans forget that other countries have problems that are like theirs, and most of them don't even have visas. This is a problem because it makes Americans less open-minded and creative about politics. It's also one reason why they often think cockily that American democracy can't fail. Snyder says that Russian and Ukrainian journalists were better able to understand Trump's campaign than American journalists because Trump-style lies and favoritism have already brought down governments in Russia and Ukraine. Snyder tells people in the last 4 chapters about a major turning point on the way from freedom to tyranny. At this point, authoritarians stop slowly building up power in the background and start taking big steps to overthrow democracy all at once. In Chapter 17, Listen for Dangerous Words, he talks about how the Nazis and other cruel governments have used words like extremism, terrorism, emergency, and exception as propaganda to take away the rights and freedoms that make democracy work. They will tell everyone that they have to give up their rights for the good of the country if there is a terrorist attack or some other kind of national emergency. That being said, this is often a trick, and dictators never give back these rights, even after the emergency is over. Snyder looks at the most well-known example of this kind of power grab in Chapter 18, the strange fire that broke out in Germany's Reichstag a month after Hitler took power. Hitler declared a national emergency, started taking away people's rights, and jailed people who were against him. He then persuaded the parliament to give him complete dictatorial power. He never gave up any of these rights. In the end, the fire, which historians think was likely started by the Nazis, gave Hitler a reason to quickly destroy German democracy. Vladimir Putin, the dictator of Russia, used a similar strategy more than once in the late 1990s and early 2000s. He used terrorism acts carried out by his own secret police to destroy institutions and resistance groups. People should be ready and alert because Donald Trump has made it clear that he admires Putin and plans to use the same terror management approach. In other words, Snyder says in the next chapter that every American should be a patriot. They should remember what's really best for the country, which is to protect democracy, and not let Trump's government trick them into thinking that whatever he wants for himself is best for the whole country. Snyder urges people in his short last chapter to be as courageous as you can because if none of us is prepared to die for freedom, then all of us will die under tyranny. Therefore, being patriotic can even mean giving up your own life. Snyder says in the end of his book that people should avoid the politics of inevitability and the politics of eternity. Since many Americans don't know much about history, they think that democracy will always work for them and that history is just growth. You could call this the politics of inevitability. When other Americans see that things are getting worse, they become fixated on a made-up past that never happened. If you look at Trump's phrase, "Make America Great Again," you can see what I mean by politics of eternity. But both of these ideas are based on wrong ideas about the past and the future, like the idea that people can't change what will happen in the future. In the end, Snyder says, people's political decisions do affect the future, and Americans need to protect their democracy if they don't want it to go away.
About the author. Tim Snyder was born and raised near Ohio's Dayton. He went to Brown University to study political science and European history. After that, he got his PhD as a Marshall Scholar at the University of Oxford. Snyder's work includes in-depth interviews, broad histories of Europe in the 20th century, like Bloodlands, Eastern Europe between Hitler and Stalin, which made him famous around the world, and best-selling books about the present day. Snyder has won a lot of academic awards, such as the Hannah Arendt Award for Political Thought and the Literature Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He has been an important part of running a number of well-known American historical and scientific groups, such as the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and the Association for Slavic, East European, and Eurasian Studies. In addition to his academic work, best-selling books, and YouTube lecture series Timothy Snyder Speaks, Snyder writes a lot for the New York Review of Books and has talked about his new books in English, French, German, Polish, and Ukrainian. Snyder can also read a number of other Eastern European languages. His books have also been turned into dozens of other languages. He has had several fellowships in the US and Europe, but since 2001 he has been a history professor at Yale University, where he studies and teaches the political history of Eastern Europe in the 20th century, mainly Ukraine and Poland.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.